This is the Extra Point Podcast from Arizona's Family.
Well, it seems it's one big story right after another here in the Valley of the Sun today. DeAndre Ayton said he and Monty Williams had not spoken to each other since Game 7 against the Mavericks. We'll get into that tonight on the Extra Point television show. But the other big story this morning, Sports Illustrated dropping a story calling Arizona high school football basically the Wild West out here. And let's get an expert's opinion. Ralph Amsden started a blog here many years ago, and it's kind of, Ralph, is it? I'm just going to go ahead and put you on Mount Rushmore for Arizona high school football. I'm going to go ahead and do that. You're the man who built this. You're the man who's responsible for today's article. How's it feel?
Well, it depends on what you're giving me responsibility for, because I'm not 100% sure that we came out smelling like roses today. So it depends on what you're trying to attach to me if I'm going to take it.
Yeah, I don't know that I do subscribe to there's no such thing as bad publicity. I go back to H.G. Bissinger and Friday Night Lights in Odessa, Texas in 1988, and I don't know that was the best depiction of a town and a football team, but you think about how that took off. I don't know that this is the greatest depiction of Arizona high school football. Did you feel like it was accurate today in Sports Illustrated?
I will say this. It definitely held up a mirror to some of our more goofy behaviors, especially at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, which I don't cover and I know very little about intentionally. I stay away from the youth age. Once they get to high school and they reach varsity, then we'll talk. Chili, who I work with, he 2 years ago started covering freshman games as a way to know the who's who before having to find out when they had a good game at the end of their sophomore year or something like that. But I've never, my knowledge of youth football has always been super limited because it's been, I used to teach at a charter school and we didn't have a football team. And so, and the kid that went to the charter school that was really good at football on a youth football team, he used to say he'd be at Applebee's with his family and a coach would come by and drop off a hat at the table and just weird recruiting tactics of junior high kids. And it never felt like something I ever wanted to know anything about. And this article was really heavy handed on the youth end that leads into high school, which is not, it's just not a thing I've paid attention to, and this is the reason why.
Well, and I think it changes so much. I mean, the best 7th grade football player I ever saw was Casey Clark. We thought he was going to the NFL. He was our kicker our senior year. He quit growing, so a lot of things can change.
Right.
I was his holder, and I used to laugh because I'm like, the guy dominated us in the 7th grade. People hit puberty at different times. But as this depicted, if you haven't read the article yet in Sports Illustrated, it was over at Chaparral High, and basically there are over a dozen kids who are making the trip in from Goodyear to go play at Chaparral. Held up the mirror to what's been happening for a while. Is this, I guess, the most kind of public thing that we've seen as far as kids going to a high school nowhere near where they live?
Maybe public. I went to Chandler High. Now, Chandler has had the Cheetahs track club at their school forever. So I went to school with a bunch of people who did not live anywhere near Chandler High because they were traveling to be part of the best track club in the state, which translated into them ultimately enrolling at Chandler High because the Cheetahs track club was for youth. And so they wanted to stick with those coaches. So some of the things that are outlined in this today, we're talking, I'm about to have my 20th year reunion in November. And that was my reality, was being surrounded by people from other places, but it was for a different sport. Also, we had IBAP. So there's a bunch of kids that didn't live in district that were coming for specific academic reasons. And then my wife is a Dobson Mustang, and people came from everywhere just to sing in the choir or play in the band or be in the orchestra because their fine arts program was so good. And so it's not new. It's the first time somebody's kind of laid something like this out on paper, but you could name, Mark, any championship team for the last 11 years of me covering, and I could tell you 5 kids that were from in district on those teams. Garrett Rand, who played at Wisconsin and played for Hamilton, he drove from Anthem every day to Hamilton. Anthem.
Wow, that's like an hour.
It's really far. The head coach, and I'm forgetting his name, and I feel really badly about it. Richard Davis, the head coach at Santa Cruz, first African American head coach to win a championship in Arizona high school football. He drove an hour from Tucson every day to Santa Cruz in order to do his job. Like, people travel for work. Joseph Ortiz, who's the head coach at Perry right now, he was an assistant coach at Higley before he got the head coaching job at Cactus. He drove from the West Valley to the East Valley to be an assistant at Higley. Like, people travel, and so I guess that's where I don't really see the difference. If we have open enrollment and your parents are willing to take you and make that sacrifice. I spent the last 4 years before I moved to North Carolina, spent the last 4 years in Maricopa. Buses came into my neighborhood to take kids to Desert Vista. The neighbor girl ran track at Desert Vista, and she was picked up from our neighborhood in Maricopa. It's always been part of the fabric of Arizona high school football. I just didn't realize that it was like people were doing the whole Pokemon catch-em-all collector thing to drop them off as like a bundle of talent at any given school. I knew that there were feeder programs, but I didn't know that they would shop. Usually those are the guys you hire on as your freshman coach.
Right, and that's I think who had the quotes today. I'm trying to figure out if Sports Illustrated was just here or if that was pitched to Sports Illustrated. Made some calls over to Chaparral today and didn't get a whole lot of response. But I did talk to some.
The author played football at Brophy.
Okay,
he's older. He was a sports journalist, and now he's a professor at Cronkite at ASU. So this seemed like kind of just a one-off thing that he was maybe interested in dabbling in for Sports Illustrated. I don't know how the whole pitch worked, but I do know that it's a Cronkite professor who wrote the article who came from here and was at Brophy and played football at Brophy.
Well, and Brophy's been recruiting kids. I mean, that's what they do. There's nobody districted to Brophy.
Which is part of my frustration with the whole idea of presenting an article is like, and I don't want to be controversial or anything like that, but I get really frustrated when it feels like the only time this comes up, because, I mean, name a quarterback in the state of Arizona, I'll tell you if they live in Boundary or not. But like, it only seems to become a big deal and make it into the past the high school football, like super fan consciousness into the regular consciousness when we're talking about the movement of young black athletes in mass. And every time it happens, I get really frustrated. And to know that it was open enrollment, for all of its faults, was designed so that people could have a choice in where they get their kids educated. And there are kids moving all over the state for academic reasons. Not to mention, we have a system. When I was a charter school teacher, we have a system in which suburban white charter holders are getting wealthy off of white flight into charter schools. Like, that system exists. The people who are charter holders in the state of Arizona are making a lot of money off of state funds. But what we want to talk about is when somebody who lives near Maryvale wants the opportunity to play with kids at Chaparral, and then all of a sudden Arizona high school football has this soft pink underbelly. No, that's where it's hard for me to engage in the conversation. One of the things that was posited in the article today was that Cesar Chavez represents like one of the poorest schools in the Phoenix district. Anybody in the Phoenix district looks at Cesar Chavez as a palace. They have 62% free and reduced lunch rate. That would be second best in Phoenix Union next to Betty Fairfax. Carl Hayden's at 93%. So some of the stuff in this article was like, maybe for the sake of narrative, the thing I think the article was trying to present and posit as a theory was nobody that's winning championships would be winning championships without open enrollment. And I think that's an interesting theory to posit, but I also don't necessarily believe it was constructive in the way that it was shared, because it's kind of shaming kids for doing what Arizona, the state of Arizona, allows them to do, which is choose the best place for your academics and athletics.
Right. I mean, if you're a good student, wouldn't you want to go to the high school that's the best fit for you? If we were to shut down open enrollment right now and said, okay, you have to go to your own high school that's right down the street, and that's that. I mean, we're on our street. I have kids they're going to be going to high school in a couple years, and it's overwhelming to think about all the choices. There's almost too many choices. But if we were to just shut down open enrollment, Do you think that would be better for Arizona high school football?
What I think you would see spring up is a large group of private schools, because I'm going to be honest, Mark, like the same amount of lower income parents who are looking for a better environment for their kids, there's twice as many parents of means looking to get their kids out of lesser environments. And so I'm out in Charlotte right now. There is no open enrollment. The only way to get your kid into a school that you're not in boundary for is to pay about $25,000 a year, so double what you're paying to go to a Notre Dame or a Brophy, to get them into one of the many, many private schools that are all next to each other in the same neighborhood. Or the district has magnet schools. So they'll have a school that specializes in like engineering, and you can apply to be part of a lottery to get into the engineering specialist public high school. My son, my oldest son, is in 8th grade. He is applying to go to the public high school that is known for its music program. If he gets into this school, Mark, he will have to never play sports again.
Wow.
Because they don't have sports. So I look at my time in Arizona covering high school football, and I cherish it very much. And some of my favorite memories, and I got a niece in the Perry band who's a senior graduating this year. And some of my favorite memories are out in the far Southeast Valley, whether at a Queen Creek game or a Basha game, where a kid would come running out from the locker room in their football pads with a clarinet, and they would march with the band, and then they'd run back into the locker room, get their marching instructions, and come back out with their shoulder pads on with their team. And it's just, there are beautiful, beautiful things about the school choice environment that exists in Arizona, but none of them elicit any type of response whatsoever, because why would they? It's only the abuses, it's only the commodification of kids by youth football people. Like the guy that came off looking really bad in this article, and I feel bad even saying his name, even though he chose to go public, so I'm not going to, but was the person who had said that he had shopped this grouping of kids, including his son, to several schools around the state and traded his kids' allegiance to a school for some gas money. Like, that's the person that came off looking bad. But to say that represents all of us is just not my experience at all.
So what does this do? I mean, if you read it, it's Chaparral basically trying to make a run at what Saguaro has done. Saguaro, the state champion last year in the Open Division, upsetting Chandler. This seems to take that rivalry to a whole new level in the next couple of years.
I suppose so. Saguaro's kind of in a tough situation because they're a lot like McClintock. Like, there was a day when all of the best athletes lived in district near a school like McClintock or Maryvale, especially, or even Saguaro. Well, a school like McClintock, the homes are either occupied by people who aren't, or just in off-campus housing for ASU, or people who moved into that neighborhood and never moved out. So you have 20-year-olds and 80-year-olds, and that's the McClintock neighborhood. Saguaro's going through some of that. So if it wasn't for the coaching staff that they had built, the talent wouldn't necessarily be transferring in. Chaparral, Brent Barnes is a fantastic coach.
Yeah.
And if you want to go to a place where you can be featured in that type of offense, then sure. Does it ignite something between Saguaro and Chaparral that wasn't already there? That's been there since Charlie Ragle. That's been there since Jason Mons started the Argonauts and then eventually became the head coach of Saguaro. Like, that rivalry is always going to be there. It adds an interesting element to it, of like, someone's trying to manipulate it from the back end. But what I can tell you is, my time around Brent Barnes and my time around Jason Mons equally, if you don't go there and give it your absolute best, you're not going to hack it. If you can't deal with Saguaro's early morning practices, or have you heard that Zero Dark Thursday weightlifting stuff they do out there?
No, fill us in.
Oh, it's just they go hard in the weight room every Thursday, and it's like what they're known for. If you can't hack it for those things, like I think at Chaparral, you might come in thinking that something's going to be handed to you, but once you get there, you realize there's some kids in district that are super hungry and know exactly what it takes. And they went through a feeder program. They know exactly what it takes to hold you off and keep that job. And it's just not going to be given to you. And so, and I think the same goes for if you have a good football culture with a good guy at the top. I think the same goes for a school like Chaparral. So, you're not guaranteed anything, but it does make it more interesting knowing that there's people out there that are trying to facilitate one school's rise and one school's demise before the games are even played. The games still have to be played. Chaparral, they just gave up the rushing record to Williams Field, so they're not there yet. They're not there yet. Like, they just got torched on defense to Williams Field, who then turned around and lost to Desert Ridge. So you can't go and say that Chaparral's some untouchable program. Saguaro has 2 losses this year already.
It's
Some
wild.
level of parity.
Well, and you wonder how transfers will come in and change the game once everybody's eligible here. And I don't blame any of these coaches. I mean, this is the rules, and this is how you win in Arizona. If you are a coach, this is what you kind of have to do, right? Like, if not, you're going to get left behind, and you might not have a job for very long.
And we wouldn't bat an eye if they were coming in for chess club or the best foreign language teachers or for orchestra or, for culinary arts or for woodshop. We would never bat an eye, but because it's football and it receives a certain level of attention, everybody's going to want to have some type of opinion. But that's just kind of what makes, and the funny thing is, it all depends on your connotation of Wild Wild West, right? I love Arizona. Arizona has my heart because it is the Wild Wild West where traditionally people came to make their way. Not everybody's a train robber. There are blacksmiths in the Wild Wild West. There's a livery. There's hotels. There's all of the things that it took to build up a society for people to come and get theirs in an honest way. Do scoundrels follow in where there is money and where there is attention and where there's infamy? Absolutely. But the whole point of the Wild Wild West was you could also go and make an honest living. And I feel like Arizona, my entire life, has been that. When I moved to Chandler in 1987, there was like 35,000 people.
Wow.
When I moved out of Chandler, there was 265,000 people. How can Arizona even be the type of place that's one neighborhood, one school? You go when there are 5 new schools built every single year. Arizona's not even designed to be that old way of, where I was originally, born, rural Wyoming. They haven't added a new high school in Wyoming in my lifetime, right? In Arizona, everything's growing. And so what are you talking about? You have to stay and play in the neighborhood that you're in. Your boundary is going to change 3 times while you're in high school. I went to 5 elementary schools without ever moving out of the same area just because the rapid growth shifted the boundaries for me. This romanticized thing people have about playing in their neighborhoods in Perry, Ohio. You left Perry, Ohio to move to Arizona for the opportunities. That's life here. Get acclimated to it. Like, I don't know. I think people are longing for something that just does not exist. Social media made the world smaller anyway. All these kids know each other before they ever get to high school. They're not some nameless, faceless enemy that you play on Friday nights, and they're the kids that you played youth football with. They're the kids that you went to birthday parties or church with or whatever else. When I started at Chandler High, it was my first day at Chandler High was the first day there were 2 high schools in Chandler. Now there are 6 public high schools plus some alternative schools run by the district.
And growing.
It's just not, and growing. And it is just not the same world that people are longing for, where you say, if you moved into a Fulton home, apologies if they're a sponsor, I'm not like disparaging them, but if you moved,
we are looking for sponsors on the show, by the way. If they would like to be, come on in. Yeah.
But if you moved into a brand new construction 2021 Fulton home, and a high school popped up right next to you, what's your allegiance there? Your dad and grandpappy didn't play at the brand new school that, I don't know if you heard about this, but Maricopa got a new high school, and they spun the wheel of phrases that we use to name our high schools out in Arizona and came up with Desert Sunrise, which surprisingly hadn't been used yet. because it's any combination of what, like
It's
desert
every
and Vista
Friday.
and
Desert Mountain
Point
beat
and
Desert Ridge in the
Yes.
mountain.
Right.
And we just got a new producer, Matt Hippie, and he's like, "Can they just name these after presidents, please?"
right. And so what are the people in Maricopa? Then Maricopa's a transient town anyway, but what are the people in Maricopa going to say? Well, you can't go to Desert Sunrise because my grandparents went to Maricopa High School. P.S. Maricopa's only been a town since 2001. It had 1,000 people in the year 2000. Now it has 55,000.
Wow.
Like it's just not, it's whatever it is that people are dreaming of Arizona high school football to be. It hasn't been that in generations. And if we're talking about transfers, I don't remember a time when there weren't big transfers. I was at track practice as a freshman when Terrell Suggs told us he was leaving for Hamilton. He told us as a group.
Did you hang on to his leg and say no? Would you stay and be a Wolf? Can you imagine?
Oh my God! Like that would have been.
Or did you think about transferring and joining him, or did you have to tackle him his senior year?
I'll tell you what. I told my parents. I wanted to go to Hamilton because it was brand new, and I went to Bogle Junior High School, and that's where all the kids went. Was Hamilton. I told them I really wanted to go to be with my friends, and my parents asked which school was closer, and I did the math, and Chandler was 2 miles away, and Hamilton was like 2.2 miles away. And they told me, you'll go to the school that is closest because you missed the bus too much. And they were right. Like I did pretty frequently, like was running out the door while brushing my teeth and chasing after the bus. So they made me go to the school that was 0.2 of a mile closer because of how often I missed the bus. I didn't know anybody when I got there. And I remember our girls basketball team won back-to-back titles, and I think we had somebody who had transferred in. We lost Terrell Suggs to Hamilton, which made them relevant. And then my senior year, our best basketball player left for Highland, and they won a title with him as their leader. Like somebody I'm friends with to this day. And so this whole idea of like the high-level transfer thing being new, it just, I mean, even the article references stuff that was going on in 2009. Taylor Lewan, Devontae Neal, all these guys they went 3 years one place. They finished up somewhere else. It's just not new. And to paint it as new, but also so much of the conversation was about youth football, and I've never known how any of that works. And so I've been intentionally ignorant to it, and it does kind of look ugly, and it makes us look strange. It's really strange to just hold up a mirror I'm sure it would be like pageant moms watching, what they look like as they're going through that process. But I don't envy parents having to make this decision. You said you're about to be in this seat. It's not easy because it's a sliding door situation. I cover recruiting too. And when a kid has 5 official visits to go on, they don't end up with 4 bad choices and 1 good choice. They end up with 5 incredible life-changing options, of which they have to decide which is the best fit for me, and they will often choose wrong. So, that's a situation we're talking about with high schools as well. There's a lot of really good coaches. There's a lot of really good position coaches. There's a lot of really good neighborhoods. There's a lot of really good communities and really active booster clubs. Which school is going to provide my kid with best opportunity, not only on the field, but also as a teammate and also as a citizen? And these are questions that parents are having to ask themselves all over Arizona all the time. And most of the decisions that they make are holistically the best for their kid. And every once in a while, it's a guy who has the ear of 13 kids who wants to make some type of a name for himself as a local power broker. And that's just something that you have to deal with when you have open enrollment, I guess.
So I guess when you tell people what you do for a living, covering Arizona high school sports, among other things, but do you feel like it's healthy? Are you going to get some blowback there from the good folks in North Carolina where you've made your home, but you're still passionate about Arizona high school sports?
Yeah, so I typically try as hard as I can to not tell people what I do, because it does elicit what are you talking about? You like, it's not even like the sports that everybody watches. It's for kids. Why would you do something like that? And I think that it's really hard to explain to people. Let's take Chili, for example, who was featured prominently in this article. Arguably as to whether or not he was featured in a responsible manner, but he is a very, very good person. And you don't come across people very often who are solely motivated by just wanting to leave their community better than they found it, right? That's why Chili and I have always gotten along. That's why we've always worked together. He is singularly motivated by the idea that kids can receive life-changing opportunities to get an education that doesn't put them into wage slavery, where they're sent, like me, 20 years after college, sending off $750 checks to the government every month, right? I mean, that is his mission. Those are his values. That's what he believes in. The ways he goes about it might be questionable to people who are outside it and not involved. But like, I look at how super specific it is what we do, and we're not in any way like heroes or anything. We just like to tell stories, and we want to see people get opportunities. And it's really fun to watch and talk about. It's a cool community, and I love it. But the idea of having to explain it to anybody else is bizarre to me. So that when people ask what I do out here, I just say I cover sports on the West Coast. I keep West Coast hours, and yeah. And when they ask what it is, I just say college and high school, and I don't really go any further because I just don't want to have to defend people from people that have never met them. And that's what I worry about with stories like this is people who have never given a second thought to high school sports are going to read this, decide that there's a problem, decide that they need to weigh in on it. And the people that are 10 toes down and still in the state, unlike me, that are dealing with this on a daily basis, who are wading through the unhealthy things to highlight the healthy things, it just kind of makes their life a little bit more complicated. And that's the one thing that I really want to throw out there is like, they just any type of narrative of some of these guys, like Jason Mons mentioned in this story. I know Jason Mons really well. I respect him a great deal. He is not slimy in any way. Chili is like, I literally trust my kids' lives to that man. He is somebody who just wants to see people have opportunities to be great and do great. And to see them featured in an article like this, that is the only window that people are going to get into these people is through the whole idea that Arizona high school sports is just gross and grimy. And for the very first time in Arizona, you feel like that humidity, that disgustingness that you can't get off you when you think about it. I hate that because for the most part, if you follow guys like Zach Elvira, if you watch the stuff that you do, Mark, you tell so many incredible human interest stories of like amazing things that happen and amazing opportunities that people are able to seize. And we sent people out there into the college ranks that are going to change the world. Jacob Conover, Brock Purdy, Bijan Robinson, they're going to change the world for the better. They really are. And that's what I like to think about when I think about Arizona high school football. But that's so long-winded, and nobody on my block wants to hear that. So they just think that I stay up late yelling at the Sun Devils, which is not untrue.
Yeah, your 80-year-old neighbor from New York is like, what's this guy?
Yes.
Who are the Sun Devils? But speaking of the Sun Devils, we got one of our own in the Arizona high school football community. Sean Aguano is the head coach, the interim head coach. First time out of the box, doesn't look like he has the talent to really make a run here. I was rooting for a Disney story big time, but what do you think he has to do to put himself in consideration to be considered for this job? And if that doesn't happen, an opportunity like this, how does that sort of springboard him forward? Because we all know he's an excellent football coach.
Yes, excellent football coach, excellent man.
Preach.
I am rooting for the same thing that you're rooting for. And so the answer as to what it's going to take is probably something very improbable or miraculous or angels in the outfield style, because the cupboard is bare. The depth of that cupboard is 2 inches. And the unrest that's going on right now within the program from things just outside of people's control isn't something that's going to lend itself to a very probable rallying of the troops to overcome adversity. The whole Pac-12 is on an upswing. There are about 9 teams that are, at the very least, like pretty feisty, and Arizona State is not one of them. And Arizona State has to play about 8 of those teams. So it's going to be a really, really tough road forward. But I do want Sean Aguano to, at the very least, I graduated from Arizona State. My wife graduated from Arizona State. I've got a lot of pride in being a Sun Devil, and Sean Aguano will go down in history as having been a head coach at Arizona State. And I think as long as he gets an opportunity to be himself and make an impact on the people who are there, maybe it's like a Dante Williams at USC situation where they would have him back. But as much as I want Sean Aguano to have the job and as good as a man as I think he is, I just don't see it being set up for him to really even have that opportunity to do well. I've got some inkling that Ray didn't want to see Herm have to go 1-5. And so this kind of gave him a little bit of an out to have Sean absorb some of how rough the first 3 weeks of his tenure are going to be. But if they improve and they show fight, they did show energy against Utah. It just didn't matter. Then maybe by the end of 9 games, when people think of Sean Aguano, they won't think high school coach. And then it would really be up to him on how he feels his mobility is. Because one of the things about even being at Arizona State, and I believe he turned them down the year before jumping to Arizona State, was that he just wanted to be around his kids. He wanted to coach his son, who ended up tearing up his knee and going into like fine arts and acting instead. But he wanted to be around his kids and his family, and he didn't want to have to live that super hectic coach life. His kids are older now. He has one daughter playing college volleyball, other kids in college. And so he might be in a situation where he would be willing to entertain the idea of being a head coach. I know he interviewed for the Hawaii job last year. And we could see a situation like when Russ Pennell, had to be an emergency replacement and all of a sudden was able to parlay that into multiple head coaching jobs. And so if people start to see Sean Aguano as a head coach, it's very possible that he'll get those opportunities. That would be really cool for him. But the optimal thing would be some crazy thing happens, Space Jam, Michael's Secret Stuff style, and they run off 8 wins in a row, and he gets to move this thing forward and give Arizona State the hometown feel and the pride and the name of the state on the front of their jersey that they have not had in decades.
You think Ray Anderson makes the next hire for football coach at ASU?
I do. I don't see the point in having him be employed by Arizona State and not do a function of his employment. If I was in charge of the widget factory and I wanted to make a widget and they stepped in and said, no, we don't trust you to make widgets, person who's in charge of the widget factory, I'd be pretty upset. And so they've shown no indication that they're going to dismiss Ray Anderson or move on from him. Arizona State's in a really tricky time right now with conference alignment, and Ray Anderson has made himself very useful. He's on Team Stay in the Pac-12, and that is useful to George Kliavkoff, and it's useful to have that information relayed to Michael Crow. And so I think that Ray Anderson's in a situation where he's vital enough, and I don't see him relinquishing any responsibility when it comes to naming a football coach, even though that's something he said he'd do if the Herm Edwards hire blew up in his face. And it's a wonder that he or anyone has a face left with how that went. But I definitely see him sticking around. I see him having a hand in the hire. I see there being a lot of gnashing of teeth and tearing of garments over that. But a lot of really good people want that job right now. And if not good, young and intriguing, that I think that'll buy a couple years of grace as ASU sifts through sanctions and, what they're going to look like in the future.
All right, and final question for you. We want you to stay safe out there this weekend because you got a hurricane bearing down there on the East Coast. Are you sticking around? Are you going to batten down the hatches there at the house? Are you going to get out? And what's the scouting report for the weather and how you're going to watch the Cardinals and Panthers this weekend?
Well, I think by Sunday it should have dissipated. I'm all set to. I've got tickets. They got a beautiful stadium in Uptown, open air. I really enjoy going to games out there, even though the football's not that great on the field. But I plan on still trying to go to that game. I'm heading out also to Clemson, NC State on Saturday. That's a cool thing about being out here is just so many colleges within close vicinity. Charlotte is inland enough that I think we're just going to get the tail of it. We're supposed to get 8 to 10 inches of rain this weekend, which is an Arizona annual rainfall. We do have to sandbag a couple areas of our house that are a little bit lower than other areas, or it will it will flood, but the really interesting thing about being out here is the water knows where to go. When it hits the ground, it finds the aquifers, it finds the hills, it finds drainage. In my experience, my favorite thing to do on a heavy rain day in Arizona was to flip on Arizona's Family and watch people try to drive on the 17, floating their Toyota Tercel like they're forging a river in Oregon Trail. So
that always cancels sports, but you're like, I kind of get it. This video, yeah.
But every varsity game here has been moved to Thursday. So they're anticipating a pretty rough Friday into Saturday. But it's not going to be anything like the folks in Florida. From what I understand, from what people have told me, only one hurricane has ever reached Charlotte to the point where there was issues with power, that went on for days. But definitely, like, hearts and thoughts and prayers and everything go out to the people in Tampa and Orlando. I'm sure working in news, you got people out there. I got people out there. Please get out. Please go somewhere else. There's just no point in trying to be more courageous than Mother Nature can be cruel. So I hope people stay safe. I've heard it's going to be pretty mild here, but in the event, we did hit Home Depot and buy a few sandbags. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, stay safe out there, my friend. What jersey, real quick, are you wearing to the game? Are you going to go like Larry? Are you going to go Kurt Warner, Edgerrin James, Neil Lomax, or have you flipped allegiances to the
So I've not really a wear another person's jersey person, but I do have for Christmas I got a black alternate Matt Leinart jersey from like after he had already broken his collarbone, and sometimes it's fun to throw that one on because people get a good. It's always nice when people can get a good chuckle as they're walking past you, and Panthers fans can appreciate having had purchased so many jerseys of people who didn't actually turn out to do anything. So I think I might go with the black Matt Leinart. I do have a Larry Fitzgerald Super Bowl jersey, but I might be 20 pounds past being able to squeeze into that one.
Well, we'll look for Matt Leinart there in the stands on Sunday in Charlotte.
Right
so stay safe. Thank you so
right,
much for your time. The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.